Okay, tonight's recording is about the research of Natalia Shakova on the world's largest ocean shelf and the $60 trillion methane catastrophe. Now, this figure was published in the top science journal of Nature, and it's focused on the largest ocean shelf in the world that is 1/4 of the ocean shelf area of the world, and it's also the shallowest ocean shelf. And it gets translated as MVA from the Russian, and then it's called MBA. Not quite sure what that means. It's methane and Arctic, I think. So what they're showing here is the temperature anomaly of 4 to 5 degrees above normal right over this East Siberian Arctic shelf, indicating that it is originating from the methane hydrates, which are normally frozen, as we would now be entering a interglacial period in the Ice Age cycle of the last 800,000 years. As they point out, due to the industrial burning of hundreds of millions of years of sequestered carbon from photosynthesis, we have reversed the Ice Age cycle, so now we have the warm water that is melting, creating these talics, which is zones of melted permafrost in the Arctic shelf underwater. So because of the increased warming of the past 5,000 years from the development of agriculture and accelerating with the Industrial Revolution, and so these are all the study areas that they've tested the methane and during the interglacial warm periods, the Arctic becomes twice as warm as the global average. And since we would now be finishing the interglacial warm period, but instead we are increasing the warming, and because methane is 20 to 35 times higher, and in actually over 20 years it's 84 times higher than CO2 in terms of radiative activity, as far as absorbing and reflecting photons for infrared heat in the atmosphere. And so here they're showing the increased methane emissions into the atmosphere over those study areas in the East Siberian and Laptev Sea. And so they've been studying this since 2007. They've documented that the methane keeps increasing, and This is called the methane catastrophe because as the methane increases, it will accelerate, and it has been ignored in the quote most representative models of climate science. And by ignoring these methane hydrates, they are ignoring the fact that the CO2 equivalent will double much faster in the atmosphere, possibly over the next 10 years instead of the next 100 years. And this is what they're calling the $60 trillion catastrophe that is being ignored by the IPCC and even the tipping points studies in climate science. And so these giant reserves have accumulated because the interglacial period freezes over the biogenic methane, and because it's frozen over in the shallow ocean shelf, then because of the global warming, there's a huge amount of stored up methane that's under pressure, so it's pressurized and melting faster than on land. And so this area would emit 3 times more methane than the rest of the world ocean, but in fact it would be significantly more than that. So the submarine permafrost is melting faster, and that shallow ocean shelf contains 750 gigatons of carbon in the form of gas hydrates, methane hydrates, and pressurized natural gas, and organic matter, methane, and so there's 750 gigatons of CO2 currently in the atmosphere. So the ocean shelf has over twice as much CO2 equivalent. And the methane hydrates are becoming destabilized because of the increase in the tallix, which is the melted subsurface permafrost. And considering those melted tallix are 5 to 10% of the shelf, then the potential emission into the atmosphere of about 50 gigatons would be possible in the near-term future, and that would lead to about $60 trillion in economic damage because of the increased heat of about 2 degrees Celsius global average from that release of 50 gigatons of methane in the next 10 years. And this is being completely ignored by the mainstream climate scientists, but this research has been corroborated by strategic partners from Sweden, Professor Orhan Gustafsson of Stockholm University and the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and Nobel Council in Chemistry, and in Italy, Professor Tommaso Tessi from University of Bologna, and in the US, a Professor Janik Martins of the Lamont Doherty Observatory. And the main authors of these studies are Natalia Shakova and Igor Semelovtov, and Jim Massa, the PhD in oceanography, has worked directly with these two Russian scientists when they were at Fairbanks, Alaska, so he vouches for them being good, sincere scientists. And basically this article was originally published in Russian in a Russian journal, and they're saying, well, Russia will have to probably set up a special climate science study institute in the Arctic with the BRIC countries, since Russia's broken off with the West. And basically that even though this is well documented, it continues to be ignored by the climate scientists. So here you have the Arctic Ocean. This is the East Siberian Arctic area. That shows the methane area under the permafrost. And the increase in temperature is right over that area, because the release of the methane is trapping the heat up to 85 times more than CO2, so it's creating that temperature anomaly. Right now it's concentrated right over the release area, but that will, as that increases, it will spread around the world as an abrupt eruption. It's considered highly probable because it's already starting to happen. So in 2021, when Western Siberia had fires, they documented a increased release of methane that was from the stored permafrost, subsea permafrost, and not of recent biological origin, because they can trace the isotope of the methane. And there's more images that show that. If you want to look at more images, the study has it. So I will give a link to the images. Let me see here. So there's a lot more images in the study. Yeah, there's 16 images. So it's the Russian Academy of Sciences. Anyway, they have the different isotopes in here. So this is the echo sound of the methane plumes as they're coming up from the subsurface that goes right up into the atmosphere. So this is the distance from the shore, and this is the depth, like 60 feet or 90 feet down. Pretty wild. So that's the ocean floor right there, and then the methane coming up as it melts, it comes shooting up. So this is what is already starting to happen, and it's published in this Russian Academy of Science journal. And I haven't seen any mention of this anywhere in the West. In fact, even in the doomer scene, they're like, "Is Natalia Shakova still publishing?" And or what's happened to her? And I said, well, yeah, she's still publishing if you look for it, But people don't know. People just don't look because I don't know. I don't know why not. They're too busy doing other stuff. So yeah, this is a real serious doubling of global warming in the next 10 years, and it's totally ignored. It gets some coverage every once in a while, but it's not in the main models. In fact, it gets dismissed. It's considered, if you look at the tipping point articles, they consider it to be not a near-term threat, because they just consider it to be from the wetlands. The methane, they think it's just from wetlands and not from the stored up permafrost, because normally in the interglacial cycles, the cold period keeps that subsea permafrost still frozen, and the warm period's not so warm to release it, whereas now it's way warmer than it's been warm during the interglacial warm periods of the last 800,000 years. So that's why you're getting this huge release of potentially 50 gigatons based on the tolics, which are already the sort of like the melted tunnels that access the deep permafrost. So the localized areas with the supersaturation of water, dissolved methane, is about 10% of the studied watered area. So that's where the talics are. That 10% of the area is where it's already melted, and it's gonna just like keep increasing out of those talics, which is another way of saying that the methane hydrates have been triggered already. That's what the term they used for the bomb's been triggered, like it's already been triggered, and now it's just a matter of time before it detonates. They say they use the term methane bomb in this paper too, but they just call it they also call it a methane catastrophe because that's a little less graphic, but on the other hand, bomb might be more appropriate because it would like double the atmospheric temperature based on the rate of the emission of the methane. So if it happened really fast, then it would double the temperature really fast. But they're saying it would happen within the next 10 years. So that's pretty much it. They're also saying that increased tectonic activity could activate it. Tolics 59%. So there's various videos about this that have been started in the past 10 years. Natalia Shakova did an interview about 10 years ago, and there's been corroboration of their research, but there's also been a lot of cover-up of their research. And for the most part, it's been covered up. And so the Arctic Research Laboratory of the Russia Academy of Sciences has been leading the research, but there's also been foreign colleagues from half a dozen countries, with the main partner being the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and with 3 different scientists leading that. And so yeah, I suppose we could look up these Swedish scientists to see if they're on YouTube or anything, because the Russian scientists are kind of like cut off from Western media, but this was published in Russian, and then I used Chrome to translate it. I'm just looking for more information about the tolics, but they're basically like pre-melted. I can't really search in Chrome. Let me see if it lets me search. Yeah. I don't normally use Chrome, so I don't know how to search. Yeah, tolic. Yeah, it didn't even see. That's the thing. You can't search the document. It's super annoying. Anyway, submit a manuscript. Yep, so this is already starting to happen, and it's just going to keep getting worse, and nobody knows about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. But yet we live in the information superhighway. In fact, if you bring up global warming, a lot of times people say, well, how come you haven't read this one, big oil scientist promoted by the Wall Street Journal? that's, really says global warming's not happening. Like, you're not really studying it unless you study the big oil propaganda. Because that's what the Wall Street Journal wants you to read. And then they get on YouTube and be like, well, I'm the only person saying this, so obviously I'm being victimized by the big global warming scientists. But actually, it's the exact opposite, where the real global warming science is much, much worse than the mainstream global warming science. And that's what this video is about. And when people say, oh, how come you haven't read this one big oil scientist promoted by the Wall Street Journal? And I say, well, how come you haven't read Joseph Fourier, who published Science 200 years ago, saying, quote, the effects of human industry, end quote, would heat up Earth. And if you haven't even read Joseph Fourier from 200 years ago, then I guess you have 200 years of science to catch up with, before you can start promoting this big oil fake scientist that we're all supposed to be reading. It's really, the mind control is really impressive. And so the scientists are not going to save us, because basically this is a byproduct of Western science. Well, it's starting with farming, spread after the Holocene. Oh, here we go. Okay, this is what I was looking for. A core was discovered that consists entirely of unfrozen, cooled rocks, which indicates the possibility of the formation of a through talc. So that's what a through talc is. Unfrozen rock. And when it's unfrozen, then it can release the pressurized methane. So there you go. So we can expect that the atmospheric temperature is going to really accelerate. It's going to double in the next 5 to 10 years because of this methane catastrophe. And that will, since the interior of the continents are 4 to 5 degrees warmer Fahrenheit than the global average, that means growing food at scale is going to be very difficult to do because of these extreme weather changes from the jet stream slowing down and getting bigger because the Arctic amplification. Yeah. And so normally they just say, oh, there's just methane released from the bacteria. When the permafrost melts, the bacteria get activated and they create methane. No, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about preformed methane that's currently frozen underwater, but it's pressurized and preformed, and it's been there unaccessed through the whole ice ages. It builds up and then it freezes, so it accumulates like that underwater. because you have when it's during the interglacial, the water freezes because the Arctic gets colder, and so the ocean levels go way down, and so everything that was permafrost gets accumulated as frozen, and then it stays frozen underwater when the interglacial period happens during the warm period of the 800,000 year cycle of the ice ages. So they go over that in the beginning of this article. Let's see if anyway, just gonna stop this. I thought I could. Whoops, we don't want to open my email. Anyway, I'm just gonna stop it for now.